The F-15 Eagle first joined the U.S. Air Force arsenal in the 1970s, and with it, ushered in a new era of the air superiority fighter. For decades, the mere presence of an F-15 in the skies caused many enemy aircraft to think twice before engaging. And it's no wonder, with the F-15's 104 victories and astonishing 0 losses. But almost 50 years later, and we have more advanced 5th generation planes like the F-22 Raptor and the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. So is it time to put this old bird into retirement? Or might it still be able to help defend the skies in a world of next-gen aircraft? Over the past few years, there has been a somewhat secretive program to modernize the F-15, dubbed the F-15X fighter plane. In fact, F-15s have continued to be produced over the last several decades, but this latest reboot could be a game changer. But what happens when you redesign a fighter plane that is nearly half a century old? And why is the US Air Force even considering it? To understand why, we need to take a look at the history of the original F-15 Eagle. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, air-to-air combat was changing. Prop-driven fighters and clumsy explosive bombs were giving way to jet-powered aircraft and guided missiles. The Vietnam-era F-4 Phantom, though very fast, also had unreliable missiles, no cannon, and was often outmaneuvered by the more agile Russian MiGs. It was clear that the US needed a true air-to-air fighter, built from the ground up specifically for the role, something the F-4 just wasn't. The Air Force had their eyes set on agile next-gen planes, but they would need the help of aircraft manufacturers. In the 1960s, the U.S. Air Force's FX competition called for a parallel fighter design, and McDonnell Douglas immediately jumped on the opportunity, along with many other suitors. Unlike previous planes, the U.S. Air Force wanted to focus on maneuverability over speed this time around, and ultimately turned their attention to McDonnell Douglas, makers of the F-4. The McDonnell Douglas YF-15A prototype ended up excelling on both fronts. It fully satisfied the U.S. Air Force's requirements and first took to the skies in July of 1972 with test pilot Irv Burroughs in the cockpit. Both the Air Force and McDonnell Douglas learned a number of very important lessons with the F-4 which they would eventually use in designing the F-15. Powered by Pratt & Whitney F-100 turbofan engines capable of Mach 2.5, the F-15 was designed to have very low wing loading and modern avionics technology. This made it quite possibly the best fighter plane of its day and made other aircraft of the time pale in comparison. Now with a contract signed and settled, they got busy building F-15s for the US as well as abroad, bringing an impressive number of customers including Japan, Israel, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia, to name a few. So how was the F-15 received? Israel, for one, was convinced they had found the perfect plane. In the case of its first combat use against Syrian fighters, it managed to shoot down 50 enemy aircraft without sustaining a single loss. Meanwhile, American F-15s served impressively during Operation Desert Storm against Iraq and fought admirably against Russian multi-role MiGs in the Balkans conflict. You could say things were looking up, and for good reason. The ability to carry numerous weapons such as Sparrow missiles, a 20mm cannon, and a Vulcan Gatling-style M61 showed it was just as serious about armaments as it was about speed and agility. The F-15 has highly advanced electronic systems to target, lock onto, and track enemy aircraft, including a pulse Doppler tracker which can look at targets that are flying down low without getting distracted at all by ground clutter. These types of powerfully advanced weapons and features allowed it to reign supreme over the skies, outfighting all of its enemies and outmaneuvering just about anything that challenged it. It seemed that everyone was highlighting the F-15's positives. From extremely safe and effective weapons and flight control systems to a perfect combat record, the F-15 stuck true to its name. Nothing could escape the watchful eye of the Eagle. But for all its greatness, the F-15 also had its share of problems and growing pains. Early F-15 engines were prone to stalling and premature wear. These issues were identified, and future production lots and variants featured more reliable engines, better fuel capacity, and other improvements. These iterations over its long life have allowed it to stay relevant and serve in numerous countries around the world. So the F-15 was a way for America to control the skies, allowing safe passage for a host of supply, reconnaissance, and bomber aircraft. The F-15 is generally recognized as the pinnacle of American aircraft development and is arguably the most successful military aircraft program in history. So that brings us to the F-15X and how it might fit in with 5th-gen planes like the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter and the F-22 Raptor. But before we do, we just wanted to take a brief moment to let you know another way that you can support our efforts. We put over 100 hours into writing, editing, and rendering 3D animations for every single video. Of course, your YouTube subscription is always appreciated, but if you want to help us to create higher quality and more frequent content, consider becoming a patron. Now back to the story. Many believe that as more F-35s roll off the assembly line, the F-15 will quickly become obsolete. But there are a number of intriguing possibilities for the future of the F-15. The proposed F-15X would be a 4th-gen plus fighter with more weapons like precision air-to-ground bombs, improved sensors, longer range, beefier engines, and more reliable data links, and could fit in nicely as a complement to 5th-gen aircraft. New aircraft programs have a lot of unknowns, like production and logistics issues, and generally get very expensive. The F-22 was so expensive that production was cut drastically to only around 100 aircraft, and it looks like F-22 production will never start up again. Instead, most public statements made by the US indicate a strong bias toward more F-35s as the future of stealthy aircraft, especially against potential Russian and Chinese engagement. But even when the US Air Force stopped buying F-15s, they remained very popular among America's allies who continued to purchase them. And after the F-15 had served the USAF for nearly 2 decades, it was transitioned from its position of active duty in the Air Force fighter squadrons to the Air National Guard units, where it is still flown in some American states, including Oregon, Hawaii, and Louisiana. Since the F-15X is estimated to be cheaper than the F-35 or F-22, it means that less 5th-gen fighters could be deployed and keep them backed up full-time by older designs like the F-15. Some of the most recent aircraft programs have been riddled with manufacturing problems, cost overruns, and slashed production numbers. In this regard, the prospect of brand new upgraded F-15 sounds rather appealing. Some have suggested that the F-15 could be converted into a weapons and armaments carrier for newer fighters such as the F-35 JSF and F-22 Raptor. But the idea of older fighters working alongside the newer birds in whatever capacity is thought-provoking indeed. It is still a very high-performance fighter, and although production is set to end in 2022, it seems like a shame to completely abandon it. So what do you think? Should the US abandon the venerable F-15 fighter aircraft or use upgraded variants alongside 5th-gen fighters? And what would you like to see from us in future aviation videos? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to check out our new channel, 2-Bit History, where we delve into fascinating, untold stories about companies, people, machines, and more. And if you enjoyed this video, we would be honored to have your subscription. We're 2-Bit Aviation. Thank you for watching.